Welcome everyone to the GRI seminar for September. Thanks everyone for coming along. I'm really pleased to welcome Keri Niven here. I last saw Keri give a talk way back in the dim distant past of 2019 at a Geospatial Research Conference we held in Queenstown. That was a really excellent talk, so no pressure, Keri. You can do a similarly excellent talk now. Keri's a digital practice leader at Aurecon, and is leading the development of digital twins and things like that. We'll hear all about that. And is going to be presenting today on bringing a human side to the development of that technology. So have I missed anything out? Cool. Welcome, Keri. Over to you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So this is going to make for my group participation questions really interesting. With some of you online and some of you in the room. And I also have to drive two computers because my notes are over here and the screen that you can see is over here. So let's see how it goes. So thanks everybody for having me. Thanks for the introduction. This is a title, it's sort of a working title actually. I was going to hopefully present it at a couple of different conferences. So this is a great dry run. Really interested in your feedback. So let's get into it and see how we go with this multitasking. It's a great start, Keri. Okay, so soon as we're back in the university campus environment, I feel like I need to justify myself a little bit. So this is me when I was little. Probably some of you don't know what Parks and Rec is anymore, hopefully. It's the only kind of degree that can lead to engineering and science that doesn't have maths in its first year. And so from then, I spent quite a lot of time working at NIWA, building the river environment classification. And then when the lure of the money got strong and the student loan got pretty big, it was time to leave the country. And off I went to the UK, and it was really good timing. So I worked for the Office for the Deputy Prime Minister about the time that the eGov mandate came out, and then BS 1192. So that was the modernising government, and BS 1192 was the new standard for delivering capital programs of work, which is really interesting in that it's paved the way for so many things that have come afterwards. And then I kind of, the day that London was awarded the Olympic Games, and the day that they blew up the tube network, I took a job for CH2M Hill, and they were delivering all of the infrastructure for the park, technical infrastructure and all of the design. And so that was an awesome few years. And then when I finished up with London 2012, they said, Keri, where do you want to go next? And they said, you can go to Panama, you can go to Rio, you can go to Abu Dhabi. And I went to Rio, had a bit of a look around, decided it wasn't for me. Panama wasn't an option. And Masdar I went to for a little while. It's in Abu Dhabi, as I said. But anyway, that all, you know, too much work and too much pressure, and the lure of New Zealand was pretty strong. So so I came back, took a job with what was Conall Wagner in those days, and have been there since 2008. 2 kids, thousands and thousands of earthquakes, lots of houses, a couple of offices, plenty of different roles, as I'm sure those of you from Christchurch, you know, similar story in that sense, but been really, really lucky to work for Aurecon. It's a global company. We've gone from about 8,000 or 9,000 people. We're slowly getting smaller as we refine our operations. We used to be really big in Africa. It's become increasingly difficult to do business in that part of the world. So we've split into 2, and now there's about 5,500 of us. And I've done lots of different roles. Like I say, I've travelled all around the world with Aurecon. And fortuitously, right before the pandemic hit us the first time, I stepped out of my global role and into a New Zealand focused role. So thank goodness for that. Didn't have to go to Perth or Hong Kong or anything like that anymore, which has been really nice. And taking on the digital lead role at Aurecon allows me to work really closely with our help. Busted. You'll have to go on mute, I think. Okay. Sorry, yeah, for those of you who are online, if you can go on mute. I don't know, does anybody have the chat access to? Is that what you were trying to look at? Okay. Okay, let's see how we get on. If you want to ask a question, it's probably better to just come off mute and shout at us for the record. So, okay, so just to finish that up really quickly, summary of me, I will never understand maths, never, don't even bother. But I'm really interested in technology and people and process and the intersection between the three. And I really like standards. I like frameworks for things, and I like ontologies and hierarchies and relationships and stuff like that. And I'm learning to ask better questions. So Aurecon, I've told you a little bit about us already. We're a pretty big firm, but we're not huge. We know ACOM and we know Jacobs. So, but we're pretty clear about our purpose, and it makes life a lot easier when you have clarity on your purpose. It helps us to focus our attention. And it also helps us to make decisions about whether we're aligned with that purpose. And if we're not, then, you know, maybe we need to think about where we are. So for me, it really works. It's a really human-centered business. And when we say bringing ideas to life, it's for the people who will, you know, live in the buildings that we design and drive on the roads that we design. And so it's really important to us, that sense of community that comes with everything we do. And our role, obviously, as part of that is leaving this legacy and, you know, going back to the people. It's the people that we leave the legacy for. So it's the people of tomorrow. It's, you know, it's our kids and our kids' kids. And, you know, in the context of everything that's happening in the world with, you know, carbon zero and all of the sustainability and climate initiatives, there's a huge amount of urgency that these decisions that we make now are responsible. You know, we can't put that off for another 20 years. I think that's becoming really, really obvious to all of us. And it's interesting in industry because that also suggests that we need to work a lot more collaboratively. So whereas in the past, you know, we'd fight tooth and nail for these particular jobs that we work in infrastructure and design. And now we're realizing that, you know, in everything there's an ecosystem, and ecosystems where people work together collaboratively for a common purpose usually turn out much better. Okay. So what are we here to talk about? I put this together quite quickly, this talk, and a few months ago now, there was a Digital Twin Summit held in Wellington, and Aurecon sponsored the summit because we're part of the Smart Cities Council for ANZ. And much to my horror, that sponsorship came with a speaking slot for me to introduce it. And I kind of went, oh my God, who am I to stand up here and talk about digital twins? You know, I'm not an asset owner. You know, I can't get my Arlo cameras to work, and my stupid electric gates don't work either sometimes. So I'm not really an expert on digitizing things. But I think everybody has a perspective on it. So I kind of stood back and said, well, all right, what's my perspective? And then I went, actually, what's your perspective? Because everyone's different, right? So, and I think when I come and give talks like these, it's actually more important to me that I talk about things that make sense to the audience. So this is what I was going to ask, and here's why. So the planning for this talk was going really well until I strayed into LinkedIn, and I read this, and I went, so Clive Jordan, they actually build this really amazing software, but here's the question, I'd like to buy a digital twin, and here's the answer down here. That's an expensive question. I can buy you a room full of non-authors talking about them and presenting the concept ad nauseum. I was like, shit. Now, okay, so just help me out here in terms of these, just gathering some information. So those of you in the room, how many of you are studying? Just hands up, analog fashion. Yeah, a few. Academics, like postgrad, employed by the university next year. Okay, so how many of you, sorry about those of you online, how many are geospatial? Yeah, okay. Just broadly. Cool. Put yourself in a box. Yeah, cool. Engineers, anyone? Cool. Oh, what sort of engineers? Okay. Cool. Yeah. Oh, cool. Okay. And so are you familiar? Who's familiar with BIM? Okay. Good. Okay. So digital twins. I mean, this is a really cheeky question, right? Does anybody fancy throwing me a definition? It's okay. It's a sort of tongue in cheek, because I guess that's the thing, right? Everybody, you know, even in this room now, we've got so many different perspectives, and with those perspectives will come, you know, what you bring to that conversation. But the fact of the matter is, and, as we were saying before I started this, everybody's talking about digital twins. They are, like, the hype is mental. And even in my business, there's people who think that it's BIM, there's people who think it's a piece of software, there's people who think it's data, there's people who think it's spatial, and they're all right, probably. But the question is, how do we actually bring that stuff together? And those definitions, like I say, they really, they depend. So, if you're a BIM and construction audience design, if I was talking, say, to an industry where we're working on designing construction projects, this makes sense to them. So, digital twin is this mythical thing that lives on whilst BIM is a point in time, contributor to this beast that continues to live. And there's been a huge journey in that in itself. Those of you who've been around long enough to remember the fight from kind of 2D CAD drawings to 3D BIM, and you're like, oh my goodness, and now we're asking people to connect models with models and and get them to talk to each other and form and learn from each other. Are you crazy? That's the next step change. And I guess, taking me back to my Niwa roots, there's digital twins of natural systems as well. So if you're a geospatial audience, millions of years ago, I wrote the upstream trace application for the river environment classification. And what's cool about this is influenced by, real-time data about the system. So when you're looking at that flow data, that's real data. We used to do it like once every 6 months. So, and then this is a diagram that really upsets lots of our geospatial people in Aurecon, because that's machine learning over there on the right. And we would say all that's doing is a supervised classification, right? I mean, it's the same, but that's digital data, and that's creating a digital twin of Cape Town. So then here's another journey. Have we gone from BIM to parametric and computationally designed models? That's a different definition. Again, this is part of Westgate Tunnel in Wellington, in Melbourne, and that was designed computationally. So the model was the king here. And whenever they regenerated the model, they regenerated the drawings automatically. It's a fantastic twin. So, to go back to my cheeky question, there is a general definition of a digital twin, pretty simple one, I guess, a digital vision of the physical thing. And we also know that there's some subtleties, right? So the twin, we want it to become dynamic, otherwise it's just a collection of data. So there's this maturity that things evolve, and taking that kind of life cycle along the bottom, every asset or every twin that is a collection of assets has its own life cycle and its own maturity. And so that's the basic definition, I guess. But also there's other stuff that's important. Like, is it a question of scale? So these are from the Centre for Digital Built Britain, of course, and they're pretty much the world authority on digital twins because they've been building them for longer than anybody else in the world, really. So left is the digital twin of a singular thing. Then what if you want to connect that digital twin to other things? And that in itself is an ecosystem. But what about systems of systems, or ecosystems of systems, right? So they're all digital twins. And here's that same question. So on the left is a digital twin of something, don't ask me what it is, that's in one of the Fonterra plants somewhere in New Zealand. And, this is a working twin that we pull apart for the purposes of operations and maintenance using virtual reality to guide how things are done. Excuse me. And in the middle, this is a collection. This is the Brisbane Aurecon office. And inside that, there's a huge amount of data. Systems, air conditioning and stairs and fire escapes and, heaps of different things in there. That's part of that ecosystem that's important to that building, but no other buildings around it really care. This is the BMS for that system, the building management system is the controller of that entire ecosystem. And on the right-hand side, this is the Trentham to Upper Hutt project that Keri have just completed. That's an ecosystem, right? Because, they redesigned the stations and redesigned the level crossings and the railway lines, but that ecosystem in its entirety, that connects with the Waka Kotahi road network. It will connect with AMDS when the standard's released. It connects with the cadastral data sets. It connects with all sorts of other things. So in that context, it's really important that the frameworks and the data that's used to underpin that twin is consistent, or at least respects each other. So, there's a whole different, that is a question of scale. The question really is, how important is it? And, like I said before, we think it's really important because at a national level for New Zealand, if everything was connected, just think of the things we could do. If we stop fighting with, we start up a project, for example, every time we go to do a new design project for horizontal infrastructure, just for example, we've got to go to all sorts of different places and get the data. And then we've got to bring it in, and that's our starting point. But to get to zero takes quite a lot of effort. If that all lived together and it was already natively connected, then that would save us a huge amount of time. So New Zealand's working really hard on this concept, and we're not going to get a mandate, or it doesn't look like we are anyway, in the same way that they did in the UK. So in the UK, Treasury said, right, going to release a paper called Data for the Common Good that sets the principles. So we all align that this is a good thing. And then from there, they appointed responsibility to create the policies and standards that implement that thinking. The jury's out as to whether New Zealand will do that, but it's not looking like it at the moment. So I think, you can take from that there's a whole bunch of definitions about digital twins. And whether you care about a national hierarchy for information and standards and frameworks, or whether you just want a model of your particular moving part so that you can fix it and make sure it doesn't break again, lots of different definitions. So why don't we actually talk about digital twins from the perspective of value instead? And that's actually where it matters more that I have an opinion about value than it does that I know anything about digital twins. So, because I'm a consumer of them, right? I'm a consumer of the benefits, just like you all are. So why don't we think about some of the things that you can actually do with digital twins? So this is the movie that was released for CRL, for Auckland City Rail Link. And, it looks pretty, but underpinning that is data. So that is a really complex ecosystem of data, and it's been pulled together, and we're using all sorts of clever film and motion graphic techniques. But the idea is that the people of Auckland understand what's coming, and they can engage with that information in a way that's meaningful for them. And similarly, this is an example, again, of Trentham to Upper Hutt, the Kiwi Rail project. So we took a model first approach on this, and what that means is we built a digital twin of everything that was part of the project. So the underpasses and the stations and the new rail alignments and all the other things that they needed to do. And one of the really interesting outputs of that process is that they could then use machine control instead of putting humans into the worksite. And then there was a whole bunch of other things that they could do with it, like they took the model into virtual reality and took it to schools and tested it on school kids to say, are those barriers high enough? Like, can you see past them? And there's a whole lot of benefits that they didn't actually anticipate. But the point was they tried really hard to build a digital twin from the outset for a purpose. And of course, the ultimate really in that digital twin maturity, and again, this is our Brisbane office, is that you can start to get data from the system, and the system can start to get data from the system and use it for particular things. So this is tracking reports of health and safety incidents, and it's trying to start looking at why they're occurring and where they're occurring, and can the building do things that are different. So what's interesting in this, which is a 7-floor timber building, if the building's on fire, how do you get out? Like, if the fire egress and the staircases are made of wood, is that an issue, right? So it's really important to have this data and to understand how you can get out, and other things that you can only really learn from a digital twin. There's really basic buildings ones that are easy to understand, like if you're getting data from your BMS about the temperature in your building, and I prefer to sit at somewhere that's 23 degrees, and Joe next to me wants to sit at somewhere that's 18, and we just sit where it's appropriate, right? And if the part of the building's not in use, you turn the heating off and you turn the lights off, and that's kind of building management 101. But what if the building did it for itself? And they're starting to do that. But this is the really interesting one for me. So how many of you have met Sean or Dane from Wellington City Council? Okay, one. So Sean's awesome, and he defines digital twins in terms of community outcomes. And it's all about what the data can enable in terms of better decision-making, better insights, better outcomes for the communities that will consume and use that data, and also the benefits of that data. So what I'll talk about this, I'll just talk about it now. So he went to council and he didn't say, hey, I want you to give me $1 million for a digital twin. He said, tell me the most important problems that you have at the moment that you can't solve. And the councillor said it's antisocial behaviour. And he went, right, tell us more about that. And they said, you know, dark corners in Wellington, people get drunk, they pass out, they, you know, wee on bushes and do all sorts of naughty things. And we can't stop it. And we don't know where to start. And so, you know, you can go away and you can say, all right, let's model the buildings. Let's model where the dark corners are. Let's model what the light looks like. You know, where is the street lighting inadequate? And then you can start to inform that further by recording incidents of antisocial behaviour. And so what you can do over time is you can gather that data and you can use it to make really good decisions about where to increase lighting. And in this case, you can ban the consumption of alcohol in particular areas. So, and how cool is that? Like, we didn't talk about technology just then. We didn't talk about frameworks or standards, unfortunately for me, but we didn't. And so it was all about outcomes. And then he went away and gathered the data, collected the insights, and used it to make better decisions. Totally different sort of digital twin. And this is an Aurecon one. This is a new one that I actually only learned about this earlier in the week. So this is Northern Pathway, the extra lanes that they're pinning onto the Auckland Harbour Bridge. And what I didn't really grasp was that you can use artificial intelligence alongside a digital twin to make better design decisions. So, and I won't tell the story anywhere near as well as they told it to me, but the idea is that, you know, the wider the lanes get, the more expensive they are to build. And to go over the Auckland Harbour Bridge, it's like the incline is quite steep. So what they did was they used the data to model, like if you're on an electric scooter or on a bike, or if you're running, where you're likely to conk out, because the bridge is quite long. And so then they use that to model, see the little pull out bits. And so they worked that out. Like, I'd always just thought that was just, you know, done by chance, but turns out there's some science behind it. And so this is what they modeled. They kind of went, all right, so at that gradient, average level of fitness, you know, speedy people, old dads, you know, fast kids, whatever, where are they likely to conk out? And so then where should we put these pull-out points? And then how can we use that to inform the design of the bridge so that, you know, if it becomes more expensive, we can justify why? And I was like, far out, that's really interesting. So that's a really interesting outcome of how the design process can be influenced. So I guess, you know, and here's the not so nice one. It can prevent really bad things happening. You know, if you've got really good data and you understand why you have that data and why you need it, then, you know, we can stop things like this happening. So this is Grenfell, obviously. And so this is where the concept of the golden thread came from. So what Judith was saying was, you know, there is a moral responsibility to keep good data across the whole life cycle of an asset. And if, you know, in this instance, they didn't have any data. And when it came to light that the particular cladding that was used on this building was dangerous, nobody connected the dots because that building was built. So they wouldn't use it in the future, but that building was built, right? So, this created a real obligation for the construction industry to carry through that thread. And as we said at the start, like, if BIM is a point in time thing, you know, you've got a design model and an as constructed model, that's a point in time. But as soon as you give that model to the asset owner, it's their obligation to keep it living. And that's really a digital twin. So if they go back and do some, you know, if they rip the cladding off and replaced it, that's another BIM activity. Twin gets updated, stops bad things happening. Slightly more positive outlook on that is, you know, we can plan really effectively for our future. To plan for like climate change and sustainability, there's so many complex things that you've got to consider. Like the scenario planning is ridiculously complex and multidisciplinary. And what better way than to feed that into a digital twin? If you're looking for those 20-minute neighbourhoods, or if you're looking to bring particular elements of community and outputs and benefits for that community, why don't you model it? Like model it before you do it. And that's a really good way to do it. So this is a paper from the Netherlands. They're doing a lot of think about carbon zero cities, and there's a really neat connection between digital twins and achieving carbon zero and carbon neutral. So I guess, these are a lot of ideas about how we might uncover those benefits. And that's where Industry 5.0 comes in. So Industry 5.0 was inevitable. So 4.0 is the machines, the rise of machines, they do all that clever stuff for us, we're obsolete. So 5 had to come. That self-preservation really is humans saying, all right, we've got a really important part in this process. So what is it that we bring? And it's that, okay, humans generally understand what other humans want. It's just a matter of figuring out how to uncover what that is. So I guess that's where Aurecon comes in. We do a lot of design thinking. Is anybody familiar with that? Hands up if you are, the concept, design thinking. Cool, couple, yep. So there's a whole bunch of, there's lots and lots of literature on it, and it's becoming really common, actually amongst design firms like Aurecon, not by surprise, but its origins comes from product design, because there's, 15,000 different ways to design a chair. But the questions that you need to be asking is, who's going to sit on it? What's it for? How long? How big does it need to be? To really go right back to the original questions, not just I need a chair. So it's in this context of digital twins, it's questions like, how can we replace 2D processes with a digital twin for every project so that it can be added to successively, so that we get more value out of the whole than we did of the sum of the parts. How can we create data ecosystems and stakeholder ecosystems that drive collaboration and enable people to work together? How can we harness visual technologies like to create better engagement, and what is it that helps people to understand these really complex things that we're trying to discuss? And that it's those questions, it's going back and just asking lots and lots and lots more questions without jumping straight to I can buy a digital twin off the shelf, or hey, it's just BIM. So let's go back to Sean. So that, to me, every single time Aurecon talks about digital twins, and that's like every day, because like I said at the beginning, some parts of our business think it's a piece of technology that we can sell. Believe me, we've got platforms like SiteLab, which is and SiteLab City actually, which is like a virtual reality engagement platform for a city. And they get really angry with me when I say, well, where are you getting the data from and what's the purpose? Like, you create this amazing platform and you're faced with the so what problem. As soon as you fire it up, it doesn't tell you how to answer any questions. You have to come up with those questions yourself. And I think for those of you who don't know Sean, look him up on the internet, because the stuff that he's doing is fascinating, and it's bringing that real aspect of community, of smart cities, of, how do we ask those better questions? Rather than taking a really narrow view on it. Okay, so this is the slide. This is the slide you're going to laugh about. So it's, this goes right back to the who am I to tell you anything question. But this is the way generally that I'm approaching the conversation at the moment. So, and Kat, I think, we can talk about this, maybe the experience we had with defence, do you think? So they asked us a whole bunch of questions. Can you come in and tell us how to digitise our estate, like literally? And we went in and said, well, how about you tell us what are the questions that you can't answer at the moment? What are your really big problems? And why can't you answer those questions? And we asked both the people on the ground and the policymakers, the decision makers. And it was pretty clear that they just didn't have access to data, they didn't trust it, they had really low levels of quality, and in lots of cases, no data at all. And so we're like, all right, so you don't know what your estate looks like. You don't know what you've got. You don't know how bad it is in terms of condition. So then, of course, you can't make any decisions like to prioritise what you build and what you fix and, you know, what you pull down. So we asked heaps of questions. We asked about 4 days full of questions. And then we went, all right, let's talk about some problems. And, you know, there was one instance where something actually fell down before they bothered to capture the data about it so they could rebuild it. And, you know, those are the really wicked problems, you know, they're the ones that same as Sean asked, you know, what are the really big things that matter to you? And then we'll ask some more questions. We'll go around in a little circle, you know, tell us all the problems and then tell us the really important ones. And then let's check that they're the important ones. And then, you know, go out and get the data to test that theory. So if we had, you know, same question to the Ministry of Education, they came to us and said, can you give us an estimate of how much it would cost to capture the same amount of data for every school in New Zealand? And we went, what do you want to use the data for? And they were like, oh, we don't know. So, okay, let's start again. What do you think you're trying to solve? And, you know, it comes back to maintenance. How do we know how to prioritise things? How do we know which schools are safe? You know, which ones need to be looked at in earthquakes and things like that. So, and then go back and capture the minimum level of data and test it and see if it works. And then, yeah, is it purposeful? Is it aligned to those outcomes, or do you need to go back and capture some more data or ask some more questions? And then, and only then, and step 6 to me is the bit that's so, it's really, really important, but it's that how you communicate that data. So it's not just picking a piece of software off the shelf because it looks pretty. It's, is it the right piece of software? You know, taking those railway barriers out to 5-year-olds, the perfect equipment for them was the wireless virtual reality kits, right? You know, I could show them a model on the screen and what would be the point of that? But jump them into a virtual world and they totally, you know, they really got it. Yeah, and then empower the people to act with the data. I mean, that's probably the most critical part, because like we said at the beginning, if these digital twins are an evolving thing, then people have to inform that and act, and then start again, ask some more questions, go back to the next stage again. So I guess that's really my perspective. It's hang on, I'll just show you the last slide. So this is really where I landed in the depths of the night last night when I was going around in circles again with that, who am I to have an opinion on this? They are really about people, and you know, you could take digital twins out of that and you could say, you know, maps, models, everything we build is all about people. And we need to be able to use this information for the betterment. And to do so, we ask more questions. But this is the bit that's important to me, I think, and I don't know if I spelled privileged right, but we're all in a privileged position, right? Because we own access to the knowledge, to the technology, to the data, to the, you know, we've got the mindset through our teachings and our backgrounds to enable us to actually drive this conversation forward. And technology is fleeting, everything is fleeting. You look, that nobody was talking about digital twins 5 years ago. And go back to those beginning examples of, you know, 2D, I think I used Sage, but you've never heard of that, the geospatial software, when I was at university, followed by ArcInfo and ActiveX and all this other stuff that's obsolete, ArcIMS, I think, you know, it's all obsolete. The processes are the same and we're still asking the same questions. So yeah, whether the type of twin will obviously vary entirely on the purpose for which it was created, and whether it returns any value really depends on whether you understood it in the first place, in my opinion. So how's that? Questions?
Thanks, Keri.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Questions? We're going to have
I
to
don't know
manage the
how you do
online
this,
part
yeah.
as well. Let's so we'll take questions from in the room or online. I guess if I just stop the show, actually, that's probably easiest, isn't it? There we go. Anyone in the room?
Look, Keri, you mentioned about commercial expansion. Curious about what do they particularly want to have for
It was for the assets mainly. Remember all those years back when they returned the data to the schools? So it used to be held centrally and then it got returned back, and it had never been maintained in its entirety consistently. And so they're doing a lot of work. This is it was a couple of years ago now, actually. They were in, what's Mel's last name? The JASMAX and construction workshop have been doing a lot of work in this space, like actually thinking, what do you want to do with the information? It's around ops and maintenance. Those, they used to have the standard school blocks that they just, the Nelson blocks, and they're not the same anymore. So it's, how do we actually capture that data that's different, but standardize it so we at least know something? Yeah.
Let's get a mic, actually. I think this is working, is it? Okay.
Thank you, Keri, very much for your presentation. I'm just wondering, in terms of the data privacy and all the legislation coming up and data ownership, what's your views on how that might influence where we go with the digital twins in the future?
Look, I think that's one of the elephants in the room. There are ISO standards for digital twins, or British standards, but will be ISO standards, and for smart cities, and also for my favourite standard, the BS 1192, which is deeply, really closely connected. There's a whole part of that standard dedicated to security. There is not an answer, no one answer, I don't think, because it depends at what scale, your personal data versus your movement versus the facilities that you're moving in. Like, I don't know. It's something that was raised at the New Zealand, at the Digital Twin Blueprint session. And I'm seeing, I guess, in our future, annexes to those that are specifically about security, but not yet, not that I've seen. Yeah.
Thanks, Keri. Rob, do you want to ask a question? I can read it out. Thanks for the talk. Is there any thoughts about digital triplets? Sounds like a joke. Will it be interesting to have one digital copy that represents truth and another to allow you to play what if?
That's such a good idea. That's like scenario planning at it. We quite often, we talk about, if you're my age, pick a path, and if you're younger, choose your own adventures. That's sort of maybe what you're getting at. I think it's a great idea, because you can have any number of, once you get to a twin that has enough data in it to allow you to run scenarios, you could have limitless number of potential outcome twins. Yeah, I think it's a great idea. The question is how you maintain them, like whether it's a point in time option or whether it's a real, I don't know. I think it's a bloody good idea. Divergent twins.
It's a new term invented here today.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rob. Complicating things. Let's go here, and then we'll go back online.
Yeah, just a question of, like this coffee cup, and what's the digital twin version of that? You can see the 3D model and everything, but what I want to know is ownership of it, who owns it? So where do you find that data fits or relates to the digital twin? That sort of intangible.
Yeah. One of my colleagues will go straight down the NFT discussion about that. So I've got such a vague grasp of what that means. So non-fungible tokens, right? So you only own a scenario of that, right? You're like, yeah. And you own, how does it work? So you don't physically own it, you own the digital replica of it, it's licensed to you. I think that's fascinating. Particularly if you've got subscription services. So we're actually starting to see that a little bit, like, all those years back after the Christchurch earthquakes, where they did all the fixing of Dean's Head and they removed all of that dirt from out Sumnerway. And so what they did was they modelled to the nth degree the face, and then every other day, once they'd done lots more excavation, they remodeled it and they paid the contractors on the difference in volume. So they were paid on the digital difference, which was also the physical difference. But in theory, they could have had a blockchain ledger for that as well. But yeah, I think that's fascinating. Depends if you clone it.
A question from Sam online. Great talk, Keri. Do you think we could learn from with medical discipline to create a human digital twin?
I would argue that in part they already are, just not in its entirety. There's huge amounts of digital, it stems from medicine, the thinking about digital twins, really. That's where it started. I think medical science is well in front. But if you, I guess if you look at a person, even a person is an ecosystem, right? So whether we are sum of parts or lots of different parts, like if I chop my foot off and, you know, created a replica of it and put it back on, and that's part of my ecosystem, but it's a different part, if you get what I mean. It's not part of the original ecosystem, it's a new part. So we're already doing it, but I wonder if when you mean the human digital twin, you're talking about the mind side, because that's completely different.
Relates to digital triple. You could have a virtual
Yeah.
simulation of the operation.
The good twin, the bad twin. Yeah.
I'd like to ask a relatively obvious question, I guess. We're talking about a digital twin for New Zealand. So the question is, one digital twin for New Zealand or lots of digital twins for New Zealand that are connected together? And if the latter, as a standards person, how do we get to the point where they can actually talk to each other in a reasonably easy way?
That's a good question. It's hard for me to answer without putting my personal bias across it, but because I think if we say it's not a software answer, then it has to be ecosystems of frameworks. So if you take what we have in place, like the ANZ, so RAM is a framework for roading asset data at a national level, and that's set. So what we might have then is say, and we've got the cadastral data set for New Zealand. Let's just take those two examples. The separate ecosystems of data and frameworks for those in their own right. What they need to do is understand how they connect and what's common and how they transfer and share that commonality. And I'd like to think that's where the New Zealand digital twin is going, in a similar way to it did in the UK. So it sets, I guess, touch points, if you like, for frameworks where they interface, rather than saying you need to use that format and you need to use that system. It talks about frameworks for interchange, interoperability actually, but I think that's probably the better way. And I'd like to think New Zealand is approaching it that way. To be honest, the big eye opener for me at that was because the original idea was that we could have an Australia and a New Zealand digital twin combined, like the effort was able to be combined. I don't know about you, Kat, but like through the day, it became so obvious to me, like we've got a really unique national perspective on data sovereignty from the Maori perspective. And I don't think it's fair to say that we'll consult with the mana whenua as stakeholders, because actually it's way more fundamental than that. So we should be bringing those issues of sovereignty right to the very front, and that's frameworks in itself, I think. So yeah, whether that happens remains to be seen how many people make that point and agree with it.
Excellent answer.
Yeah.
Convince me.
What are the things that cannot be answered with a digital twin?
That can't be answered. I reckon that what you can never answer is it the right answer? Do you know, because it's not definitive. And the best you can do, in my opinion, is to say, is it solving the problems that I need it to solve today? And do I have a grasp on, if not, why not? and what the gap looks like and how to go from here to here. Because you don't know what you don't know, I think. So I don't think there's one right answer about digital twins ever. And if we're comfortable with that, then that gives us a lot of freedom within that framework. What else can it not? What won't tell you what to do? What? It won't tell you what to do, and it won't tell you in what order you should do it either. It's probably a lot of other things they don't tell you, but okay.
Because if you take the example of the alcohol ban, it's like, okay, yeah, there is data around here, but you don't know until you implement it, you don't know. So finally, you might have gathered all this data, made an assumption, or take a path, which finally is not the right one.
Well, I think that's the benefit in some ways of a digital twin, in that it's iterative. So if you go back again and say, all right, 12 months on, was that right?
Yeah, but now you have policy in place where you put the alcohol ban, now you need to remove it. Good luck with that.
That is true. That is very true.
Not answering your question for you, but
Go on,
I suppose
answer it.
part of the point is with a digital twin is that you have a whole lot more data that you can use to have as an evidence base for your decisions, as opposed to doing something without that evidence base. So it still might not be the right answer, but at least you're closer to understanding where you were and where you're going to, and whether that data is supporting that decision in the first place, than having no data to make the decision with it all.
Yeah.
So it might not be entirely right, but at least it's a step towards insight, I suppose. Sorry, not to answer the question.
Thank you. Did you want to ask a question as well? No. Oh.
Come on, come on.
There was someone over there. who was-
I guess to expand on what Matt's comment on for interoperability between companies or infrastructures or ecosystems is obviously a challenge. I would imagine the standards would be is our standards setting that up, I guess, to make those interfaces okay. Hopefully, I guess that's the idea of standards. But I guess the other way to look at it is over time, because that building that we showed, I don't know when that was built, but if the consultancy's gone bust or they've gone away, how do you ensure that the digital twin is maintainable by the next generation? So I guess a lot of the software that you might use in your business could be proprietary or could have end of life cycles. So how do you ensure that the data and the digital twin model carries forward in time?
Yeah, it's a good question. It comes back to, fortunately, sometimes to ownership. Because, so if you've got a building, I'll pick on a particular building in Christchurch I know quite well. So the builders of that building don't own the building, and therefore they don't own the BMS, which is the building management system. So the first trick to getting intelligent data about a digital twin of your building is getting access to the BMS. And quite often when you put in a BMS system, the ownership of the system and the data within it goes to the company who owns the BMS system, if you get what I'm saying. So it goes around in a little bit of a circle. So say if you've got a Siemens BMS, they'll want to own the system and the data. And it's really hard to negotiate the release of that data, even though you might be the tenant of the building who could really benefit from that data. And even though in some instances, you're the owner of the building. So it happens all over the place, like where there's contracts that have been signed where you don't, you sign away your rights to that information unknowingly sometimes. So it happens all over the place. We're doing quite a lot of digital twin projects, including one with RMIT in Melbourne and in Vietnam. Access to the data about facilities is the sticking point. And, it's like going, okay, do we go out and, because we don't have access to that data, do we go and retrofit a whole lot of, devices to capture it again? So yeah, I guess that going back to the earlier question about security, that's what we're seeing at the moment. It's not always open. I was going to say to your point about standards, the frameworks are really about how you classify data and how it changes over time. the best thing I think that I'm seeing at the moment is that people are starting to use open standards for transfer of data. So things like COBE and, IFC in some instances, and codifying your data with things like Uniclass actually gives you that longevity. So whatever the system that you're using today, like if you've got an asset database like Maximo or SAP or something like that, that might not be around in 10 years, but if you've codified your data using an open format, that will be around in 10 years. So that's what we're starting to see, some people who are quite mature in that space really moving towards open data standards and frameworks. So yeah, different.
Thanks for a really interesting talk. I just have quite a big question, I guess, and I don't expect answer for that one anyway. Rather maybe opinion on, or what do you think? So you mentioned that it's all about the people or for the people, right? But how you plug people into it. So you had a nice example of a bridge there. So there's a behavior of people, and for those smallish case studies, there are ways how to predict, how to find out what people really think. But then when you have big projects like for Melbourne, Auckland, or New Zealand, then it's a what if scenario for people, but there's still a question how people behave, because technological problem, they are solvable. They might be incredibly complex, but there is usually some kind of solution for that. But people are just annoying. They do whatever they want.
Random agents.
Yeah.
Did anyone go to the Regenerate Christchurch exhibition that was in the Casual Mall a while back, where they had the virtual kayak and stuff like that? Go to that. Do you go to it? So Aurecon put that on, and the idea was there was already a regeneration plan for the red zone, but what we wanted to do was test the thinking, and they got thousands of people through that exhibition, thousands of them, and however many of them were kids who wanted to tip out of the kayak or play in the sandbox or whatever. That's fine, but what that whole exercise was actually doing was collecting information against the model that had already been developed. So I don't think there's a perfect way upfront, to capture sentiment and behavior, but things like engagement and consultation, I think a lot of those are moving to being data-driven exercises, and the magic bit is in how you get people to contribute freely without understanding that they're being asked to contribute to something that's really going to be meaningful. Like there's an example a while back. So we bought some virtual reality goggles with eye tracking software on them, and so we brought in a whole lot of architecture students to Aurecon, and so what they were doing was they're designing buildings and things like that, and part of their job is to design things like fire exits. And so there's a really good way of testing how stressful fire exits are for people, and that's you put them into a virtual building, flick on the virtual fire alarm and find out how hard it is for them to get out of the building. And with the software, you can start to measure how stressful it is. And the students were quite clever. They ran the tests on their lecturer and put them into all of these like little mazes, basically virtual mazes, and said, you got 3 seconds or a minute or whatever to get out. And then, so they use that data to go back and they'd change it slightly, and then they'd do it again, and then change it, and then do it again. So that's a real human in a virtual, in a simulation. So, but yeah, you're quite right. Like when you're modeling behavior, it's randomized, but it's still not representative necessary.
Well, I guess given more information and more data, more observations, those models can be refined, right? Updated. The digital twin's the enabler. And those models can be improved over time.
Yeah, I mean, there are individual-based data in New Zealand. It's probably hard to get to them as a corporate, but there are solutions for that. Well, there might be solutions that might help to verify things, because it's usually easier to verify than have the right setting from the start.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Good questions.
Last call for questions. It's been a lot. It's 5:02. We need to start drawing to a close. Anyone online? Interesting topic. That's why it's drawing so many questions. And you present it well. Last call.
You said you will have a few conferences coming up where you might present your work. So I wonder what's the next big thing where you will present?
Goodness,
Oh,
anybody
maybe-
knows these days. Elgin's coming up soon. When's that? November. There's shameless plug for Digital Twin Week though. Thank you for that. So in October, and it's not an Aurecon thing, it's the Smart Cities Council of ANZ, which is lots and lots of organisations, and Digital Twin Week is first week of October, I think. So have a look. Anyone can watch any of them. I'm doing a panel session on digital twin, surprise, but it's we're bringing climate, sustainability, future energy, and a couple of academics, one from NERA, one from Auckland University, and to talk about future view, evidence-based decisions and things like that. Will be fascinating, and there's lots of other really good talks on as well. So have a look at that, and then Building Nations should go ahead in November. Should, and then Future Fit is now February. Our gym's in November. Yeah.
I think that's a really good question to end on. Thanks, Mel.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of like how to find out more. What's next? But for today, let's call time because we're out of time. So thanks everyone for joining us online or in person. Thankfully, we're able to do this in person. I hope we'll continue to do it in person. And yeah, and as Elena is supporting on virtually online, let's also do that in reality.